Under the cold stars of the Orion Reach, the Galactic Empire convened. 12,000 systems, 1 trillion citizens, and a fleet that darkened suns. This was the order that had endured for eons. It had broken rebellions, silenced dissent, absorbed cultures like sand in the tide. Diplomacy was formality. War was ceremony. Victory was destiny. So when a minor, insignificant world on the outer spiral refused to submit, it was not considered a crisis, but a correction. Humans. Bipedal, carbon-based, aggressive. The preliminary dossier marked them as chaotic but low threat. No unifying government, primitive space-faring capability, and worst of all, emotionally unstable. A curiosity more than a concern. They had no hyperlane mastery, no antimatter regulation, no wormhole mapping. Their fleets, such as they were, ran on combustion and hope. Their world, Earth, was crowded and polluted, their species fractured by ideologies and languages. The Empire saw them and made a decision. Containment was unnecessary. Subjugation would be effortless. A diplomatic envoy was dispatched. It never returned. In a standard cycle, the Empire responded. 2 dreadnoughts and a command carrier were sent to low orbit above Earth to initiate the standard protocol of compliance. Local satellites were erased. Terrestrial communication networks silenced. Then the Empire spoke, a transmission, as was customary, translated into major languages, offering peace in exchange for unconditional surrender. The response was not silence, it was defiance. Humanity, against every projection, mobilized. Within days, missile silos opened across the continents. Not symbolic threats. Not deterrence. Launches. Actual kinetic fire against an interstellar power. No species had dared that in 5,000 years. On Europa's moon, the Empire's relay was hacked by ground-based Earth systems. Crude but effective. One dreadnought's outer hull was breached by a nuclear strike launched from a 70-year-old submarine. No surrender was issued. No emissary dispatched. Humanity did not sue for peace. The incident was logged under the term initial aberration, and the fleet was expanded. 50 ships entered the Sol system. Civilian structures were leveled. Human defensive installations targeted and annihilated. Atmospheric detonation of orbital weapons rained fire across 3 continents. Empire officials anticipated capitulation in hours. But then something unfamiliar happened. The humans adapted. They encrypted communications using randomness protocols that artificial intelligences could not predict. They buried bunkers beneath radiation zones. Their aircraft, obsolete by interstellar standards, began using terrain as camouflage, hugging mountain ranges and storm systems. They disappeared into their oceans and deserts, and then reappeared behind enemy staging grounds with sabotage squads made of men and women who refused to wear transponders. They became ghosts, improvising with scrap metal and outdated tech, deploying EMPs and cryoweapons harvested from repurposed research satellites. Empire generals were confused. The humans weren't fighting for territory or power. They weren't protecting infrastructure or colonies. They were trying to inflict pain. They struck fuel depots, slave transport ships, medical convoys. Nothing was sacred, and nothing was safe. The Empire escalated again. Reinforcements arrived. Planet-side resistance was crushed in hours. Earth's capital cities were flattened. Over half of the human population was gone. But the resistance didn't shrink. It grew. Captured prisoners bit off their own tongues to avoid interrogation. Civilians formed decentralized resistance cells that operated independently, sharing no command structure, no broadcast patterns. Human children were found operating sniper nests. Drones hijacked by students crashed into landing bays. In one case, a human hacked a cargo relay using a signal bounced off the rings of Saturn. Another coordinated an orbital drop without satellite support. The Empire began using the word anomaly more frequently in briefings. And then came the disappearances. Entire Empire scout units gone dark. Warships found adrift, crew dead from atmospheric bleed caused by microscopic fractures in hull seams, fractures caused, it was discovered by high-altitude sand dispersal weapons. Crude, ridiculous, effective. Commanders stopped laughing. Analysts started running simulations. None of them predicted this level of attrition. A single human cruiser, ancient, pre-Empire technology, breached a fleet formation near the asteroid belt, detonating its core reactor and taking 3 capital ships with it. The act wasn't just suicidal. It was surgical. Intentional. It changed the psychological profile. Humanity wasn't resisting. They were retaliating. In the Empire's archives there were protocols for genocidal containment. But these had not been invoked in centuries. The High Command debated. What kind of creature burns its own cities to the ground and then rises from the ashes with sharper claws? What kind of species engineers viral code to infiltrate alien fleet AI, embedding themselves as harmless diagnostics only to detonate system-wide chaos days later? What kind of race operates not on the hope of victory but the guarantee of mutual destruction? Humanity was labeled a paradox, technologically inferior yet strategically superior in unpredictability. The Empire had faced insurgents. It had faced rebels. But this was something else entirely. An Empire scholar was assigned to study the psychological roots of human defiance. Her first report included cultural fragments. Give me liberty or give me death. Live free or die. We will not go quietly into the night. Her conclusion: humans believed in something beyond survival. They believed in meaning, vengeance, martyrdom. Not out of despair, but out of conviction. No other species in the galaxy had ever fought like this. The humans had a saying: be careful who you corner. The Empire didn't understand its meaning until it was too late. What they had assumed to be a minor conquest was quickly becoming a war of attrition, and more dangerously, a war of memory. Even if humanity died, they would make certain they were remembered. Not as victims. Not as savages. But as a species whose fury could shake the stars. The final message intercepted before all human global networks went dark was not a cry for help. It was a warning. You wanted war. What comes next is not war. It's the consequence of arrogance. We will not win. But neither will you. The Empire began to understand. This wasn't resistance. It was prologue. The first orbital strike crippled half of Earth's communication grid. The second wave targeted launch sites, observatories, and defense installations. Major cities became molten craters. Billions died within days. The Empire believed the war was over. They began reconstruction protocols, deploying drones and pacification units to enforce compliance. But they misunderstood what they had ignited. Scattered survivors coordinated without centralized command. Underground networks formed almost overnight. Former enemies, governments, corporations, even criminal syndicates, merged under a single motive: retaliation. Humanity, fragmented for centuries, had never been more unified. Not by leadership, but by wrath. The first retaliation came from beneath the Pacific, where a decommissioned nuclear submarine launched a missile directly into an Empire staging ship mid-resupply. It had no official launch command. The crew operated on personal conviction, bypassing every known chain of command. There were no orders. Just resolve. The Empire responded by deploying tactical sterilization units across population centers, exterminating what they labeled as residual combatants. But nothing about these humans was residual. They adapted faster than the Empire could analyze. Within weeks, entire units of shock troopers vanished and areas thought neutralized. What the Empire called ruins, humanity called cover. Empire engineers disabled atmospheric sensors after persistent interference from high-frequency pulses. They assumed these were natural phenomena. In truth, they were traps. Old weather satellites repurposed into signal jammers. They scrambled navigational equipment, rerouted enemy dropships, and isolated patrols from command channels. Human forces would then ambush them in environments engineered for maximum disorientation. On Mars, a terraforming station had been bombed and abandoned. Empire scouts landed to scavenge its remains. The atmosphere generators activated as they entered, rapidly converting oxygen levels to lethal concentrations for the invaders. The entire battalion died in under 4 minutes. The logs showed no signs of life in the area. It had been programmed weeks prior by a lone technician who had stayed behind after evacuation. In the asteroid belt, a derelict mining colony launched an improvised railgun constructed from decommissioned excavators. The projectile, a reinforced alloy beam, pierced the destroyer's core reactor. It detonated from the inside, sending shards into 2 adjacent frigates. No official military personnel were involved. Miners did it. With blueprints etched on salvaged data pads and a vengeance no machine could simulate. Humanity stopped fighting with armies. They fought with algorithms, viruses, and psychological disruption. They hijacked civilian broadcasts across Empire systems, flooding networks with archival footage, collapsing towers, burning cities, screams of children, and final words of mothers holding their families in the last seconds. These images weren't propaganda. They were declarations. They didn't plead. They accused. Empire morale faltered. Discipline fractured. Officers requested reassignment away from Seoul, citing mental fatigue. Others grew paranoid, fearing human infiltration. The requests were denied. Replacements sent. They disappeared too. When Empire vessels approached Jupiter to establish a forward base, they encountered mines hidden in the planet's magnetic field. These weren't mechanical devices. They were gravitational anomalies, weaponized by Earth's physicists using principles the Empire had dismissed as theoretical. 3 ships collapsed in on themselves, crumpled like paper before vanishing into spatial rifts. No transmissions. No survivors. In the moons of Saturn, Empire archives recorded the appearance of null zones, areas devoid of sensor input, data, or recognizable physical phenomena. Attempts to investigate ended in silence. One commander ordered a full fleet to fire into the void. Nothing emerged. Days later, the fleet's AI cores began corrupting, playing audio loops in dead human languages, repeating coordinates back to Earth. A virus named Grail 7 began spreading through Empire databanks. Its source was traced to a university database on Earth, thought destroyed in the first wave. It embedded itself into strategic planning algorithms, causing delays, miscalculations, and overcommitments. Empire forces attacked decoy positions, rerouted supply chains into minefields, and found themselves fighting ghost battalions, fabrications projected through reactivated planetary satellites. Humanity had turned information into a weapon. Empire scholars admitted it in private. Their data superiority was no longer absolute. Human chaos had become structured, calculated, intentional. Captured soldiers were interrogated. They revealed nothing. One unit, composed entirely of volunteers under 25, detonated their own implants rather than be extracted. The implants were developed in underground labs using repurposed medical tech. There was no standard procedure. No unifying template. Just endless iterations and personal sacrifice. Empire attempts at cultural infiltration failed. Psychological warfare proved useless. Humans were not demoralized by loss, they were fed by it. The more they were crushed, the more dangerous they became. The Empire began seeing patterns they couldn't decode. Engagements were no longer random. Resistance became systemic. Coordinated strikes on supply chains, infrastructure, and logistics showed statistical precision. Analysts ran projections. They didn't show human victory. They showed total destabilization of the entire regional command structure. One Empire admiral stated in a now-sealed report, "We are not fighting to win. We are fighting to delay their certainty." Within the Empire's fleet, captains began implementing personal fail-safes. Not against human attack, but against internal collapse. Ships locked out non-essential personnel from navigation systems. Security teams monitored command officers for signs of psychological degradation. Empire soldiers began questioning the war itself. Why had it started? Was the cost justified? Had they truly understood who they were fighting? In one recovered transmission, a human voice whispered through static, You've mistaken our silence for weakness. It was patience. You wanted us unified. Now we are. And we will not stop. Empire systems began registering anomalies across multiple occupied zones. Drones failed to report. Satellites blinked out. Civilian installations started self-destructing. What the Empire failed to realize was that these events weren't malfunctions. They were countdowns. Something was coming. Not a fleet. Not a message. A culmination. And humanity, though burning, bleeding, and broken, had made one thing clear. Survival was no longer their objective. Consequences were. The Empire's Central Command authorized the Orion Protocol, full sector sterilization. It was rarely invoked. Entire planetary systems were to be scorched, atmospheres destabilized, biospheres erased. Empire doctrine dictated such action only when faced with existential threats. Humanity had crossed that threshold. Massive purification fleets arrived, equipped with world burners and gravity anchors. Their mission was not conquest, it was deletion. Earth was the primary target. The plan was simple: destroy the cradle, scatter the remnants, extinguish the culture. No species had ever recovered from such action. But Earth was already gone. Not physically, strategically. Empire vessels found a planet gutted of infrastructure, drained of resources, evacuated in silence. Global urban centers stood hollow. Oceans swirled with magnetic interference. Every known human facility was either booby-trapped or buried beneath unscannable layers of rock, interference, or misdirection. Humanity had made Earth irrelevant to the fight. The real war had moved off-world. On Titan, an ancient mining station now served as a production hub for automated skirmish drones, capable of mimicking Empire transponder codes and mimicking fleet formations. On Phobos, captured Empire vessels were stripped and repurposed by human engineers who had learned the language of their enemy, hijacked their protocols, and reprogrammed their own weapons against them. Every human outpost was a lie, every silence a threat. The Empire accelerated destruction. 6 moons were vaporized. Artificial suns detonated. Terraforming projects across the belt were incinerated. But none of these actions affected the enemy. Humanity had already moved beyond positional warfare. They didn't hold ground. They dismantled it behind them. The psychological toll escalated. Human communications increased in frequency, tone, and precision. They sent taunts through subspace, embedded messages in sensor feeds, and altered star charts across Empire navigation systems. They showed footage of Empire soldiers breaking down, retreating from shadows, firing into empty corridors. Nothing enraged the Empire more than the feeling of losing control. That rage made them predictable. Humanity exploited that. A squadron of Empire dreadnoughts was baited into a high-density asteroid cluster with falsified distress calls. They collided with mines shaped to resemble debris. 3 ships imploded. Survivors were picked off by stealth drones cloaked in thermally invisible exoshells, developed from repurposed asteroid insulation material. The Empire lost more to traps than to firefights. Humanity's use of pattern disruption was relentless. Nothing they did followed standard doctrine. One attack was launched using frozen corpses laced with coated biotoxins, launched toward an Empire carrier via a hijacked cargo shipment. Another saw the ignition of a brown dwarf's magnetic storm to blind a fleet's sensors moments before boarding parties emerged from disguised heat plumes. Every tactic was invented from desperation, honed by hatred, and executed with surgical timing. Empire leadership grew increasingly fractured. Internal accusations of incompetence, cowardice, even treason rippled through command structures. Strategic divisions failed to cooperate, fearing data corruption or hidden infiltration. Paranoia replaced coordination. Officers altered codes weekly, sometimes hourly. Communications collapsed under their own weight. Empire AI systems began flagging human behavior as an unknown form of warfare, total cognitive disruption. And then came the artifact. In the remains of a destroyed station orbiting Neptune, an Empire salvage crew discovered a data core sealed in ancient Terran alloy. It resisted all forms of decryption. When finally accessed, it didn't contain tactical data or weapon schematics. It contained a message. You cannot kill a species that has already accepted death. You have taught us only one thing: how to become the end of empires. It was signed by no government. No military. Just a symbol, an open eye over a scorched planet. The meaning spread quickly among Empire ranks. Fear, for the first time in generations, became institutional. Recruitment slowed. Entire battalions refused redeployment to Seoul, choosing court-martial over certain death. Officers falsified reports to avoid further engagement. Supply lines broke down under logistical strain and operational collapse. What had begun as a show of force had become a hemorrhaging campaign with no visible target, no endgame, and no honor. The Emperor himself authorized the formation of a clandestine advisory group to understand the human psyche. Their conclusion was unanimous and unsettling. Humanity had evolved beyond the need for victory. Their warfare had transcended territorial logic. They sought no throne, no power, no negotiation. They had converted war into legacy. They were building a memory, one that would persist long after either side fell. New directives emerged among human factions. They ceased identifying as nations, ideologies, or tribes. They became cells of one purpose: erasure. Their target was not just Empire's ships or fleets, it was the concept of empire itself. They destroyed databanks, rewrote historical logs, corrupted diplomatic archives. One by one, Empire-controlled systems began forgetting their own origins. Whole colonies awoke to find their planetary records scrambled, their identity nullified. Cultural erasure was a tactic humanity had suffered. Now it was one they mastered. The Empire called them shadows. But they weren't invisible. They were everywhere the Empire had touched, bleeding into its infrastructure, infecting its belief in permanence. Humanity wasn't a species anymore. It was a virus in the memory of the galaxy. The Seoul sector was officially marked as unstable. Access was restricted. Supply routes rerouted. The Empire began referring to the region not as occupied, but as lost. Humanity, scorched and scattered, had achieved the unthinkable, not by winning battles, but by rendering them meaningless. Not by preserving their world, but by teaching the galaxy that if you destroy the home of a species like theirs, you don't end it. You unleash it. Empire fleets pulled back to consolidate. The once boastful galactic superpower now prioritized containment over conquest. Resources were reallocated to defensive operations. New protocols advised against further engagement in the Seoul region. What they once saw as a minor rebellion had become a contagion. Every new engagement with humans yielded fewer results, more damage, and deeper systemic collapse. Yet the attacks didn't stop. Empire databanks began suffering from recursive code failures. Firewalls were rendered obsolete overnight. Human-designed viruses didn't seek control. They dismantled logic structures, rewrote core functions, and embedded irreversible contradictions. Empire AI, unable to reconcile corrupted input, turned against itself. Manufacturing hubs began producing unusable equipment. Battle droids received conflicting orders and executed both. Logistics collapsed under self-inflicted sabotage. No human troops were present. Humanity had perfected non-linear warfare. Their operatives didn't strike from the shadows, they became the system's ghost. One Empire warship suffered a total systems crash after initiating a diagnostic scan. The code used in the scan had been subtly corrupted months earlier during an unrelated resupply mission. No one noticed. Humanity didn't need brute force. They needed time, and the Empire gave it. Then came the turning of the colonies. Empire vassals, client species who had submitted centuries ago, began to question their allegiance. Broadcasts originating from deep within the human dead zones reached across light years. Not threats. Truths. Images, testimony, unaltered recordings of the initial bombardment of Earth. They showed the screams, the fire, the unprovoked nature of the conflict. The Empire's image cracked. Some worlds resisted conscription orders. Others sabotaged their own shipments. A few, more quietly, began to assist humanity, offering data, logistics, safe havens. The cracks deepened. The Empire had always ruled by fear and superiority. But fear had shifted direction. Their invincibility had been disproven. Their control, once absolute, now demanded constant reinforcement. A quiet revolution brewed inside their borders, and humanity fanned the flames. Diplomatic centers were the next targets. Not through attack, but disruption. Key treaties vanished from archives. Interstellar registries reported inconsistent star maps. Legal frameworks the Empire had enforced for generations became unprovable. The foundation of their governance, order, was dismantled by entropy, seeded by human code. Humanity didn't conquer planets. They severed meaning. Entire Empire sectors found themselves isolated without ever being attacked. Communications blacked out. Beacons corrupted. Fleets dispatched to investigate were redirected by falsified navigation signals. Some were pulled into gravity wells, others into dead sectors booby-trapped with decaying satellites that released corrosive nanites on contact. These weren't accidents. These were executions, deliberate, clinical, message-laden. Humanity understood they couldn't overpower the Empire. But they could unmake it piece by piece. A single message began circulating in intercepted Empire command channels. Asterisk. The war ends when you forget who you are. Asterisk. Empire military doctrine began to crumble. Traditional formations failed against unpredictable, decentralized foes. Human strategies rewrote the battlefield in real time. No two encounters were alike. One planet was flooded with EMP storms triggered by atmospheric ionization from solar reflectors. Another suffered economic collapse after human agents manipulated interstellar trade routes to oversaturate supply and collapse demand. Not a single shot was fired. This was humanity's genius, disproportionate response through targeted chaos. They broke systems, not just machines. Empire commanders tried adapting. They built redundant systems. They rotated encryption protocols. They trained soldiers in counterinsurgency tactics based on predictive models. But nothing worked. Humans were not repeating tactics. They were evolving. Every loss they took became a blueprint for the next phase. Every death a lesson. Every failure a weapon. Even direct confrontation no longer followed rules. One Empire fleet entered an abandoned station to capture human prisoners. Instead, they found a hall filled with names, written in blood, etched in steel, digitally preserved on every surface. Not soldiers. Civilians. Children. Scientists. Farmers. Every name, a life lost in the initial invasion. Every name, a permanent reminder. When the Empire tried to wipe the records, the names reappeared on their own ships, in their databanks, on their personal devices. They had been embedded in the infrastructure. Grief had become a delivery system for war. The psychological cost was irreversible. Suicide rates among Empire personnel spiked. Veterans refused to re-enter the Soul sector. Some began documenting human tactics not as military threats, but as philosophical shifts in warfare. A new term emerged in the Empire's private intelligence circles, cultural annihilation. It described what humanity was doing, dismantling not just the Empire's physical capabilities, but its very narrative. By removing context, rewriting memory, and fracturing perception, humanity rendered victory irrelevant. There would be no clear end, no grand surrender, no moment of Empire triumph. There would only be uncertainty, doubt, and the slow death of meaning. For the first time in recorded history, an Empire Emperor issued a sealed broadcast to his highest council. Asterisk. If we win this war, it will not matter. The cost is the idea of ourselves. Asterisk. There were whispers of pulling out entirely. Let the humans rot in their broken system. Quarantine the region. Let time erode them. But the data contradicted the hope. Humanity wasn't eroding. They were spreading. Subtle activity began appearing in outer territories, slight shifts in code, unfamiliar algorithms, untraceable pings across secure channels. Unexplained delays in industrial hubs. Drone fleets reporting ghosts, contacts that couldn't be confirmed but were consistently detected. Humanity had left its birthplace, but not as refugees. They were carriers. Every Empire system they touched carried the seed of future collapse. Every firewall they cracked, every protocol they rewrote, every network they touched, they didn't just sabotage it. They repurposed it. The Empire had made a fatal mistake. They taught humanity how their systems worked. They exposed their logistics, their weaknesses, their dependence on control. And in doing so, they ensured that even in death, humanity would endure, as interference, as corruption, as myth. The war had moved beyond territory, beyond destruction, beyond strategy. Now, it was about permanence. And humanity had decided, with absolute clarity, that the Empire would not have it. The collapse didn't begin with a final battle. It began with silence. Entire sectors stopped transmitting. Empire probes returned nothing. Supply chains ceased function without external interference. Reports filtered in from the edges. Systems once critical to governance were now inert. Automated defense grids turned dormant. Colonies abandoned without trace. No resistance. No conflict. Just the void where authority had once been. Then came the disappearances. High command officials vanished from secure compounds. No breach alarms. No external approach. Just empty quarters, open files, meals left half-eaten. Surveillance feeds looped endlessly with no sign of manipulation, as though the targets had simply ceased existing. Their positions filled hastily, but the replacements didn't last. Within weeks, they too disappeared. Fear infected the upper tiers. Empire historians began documenting anomalies. Archive footage altered itself overnight. Speeches erased from memory cores. Statues replaced by featureless monoliths. Identity deconstruction wasn't just strategic, it had become viral. Databases now recorded historical figures as unknown. Public records showed blanks where conquests were once glorified. Cultural artifacts rewrote themselves in real time, reshaping the narrative towards something incomprehensible. Humanity's influence had moved beyond the physical. Psychological breakdowns spread among Empire elite. Dreams became unified, visions of burning skies, broken monuments, and a singular phrase whispered in extinct tongues, asterisk. You were never gods. Asterisk. Military psychiatrists tried to suppress the panic, but the phenomenon spread faster than any contagion. Some believed humanity had found a way to weaponize thought. Others feared something worse, that their own minds were unraveling under guilt. Entire species under Empire subjugation began defecting. Not to humanity, there was no one to join, but from the Empire itself. Some worlds severed all contact, others initiated internal purges of Empire influence. A few detonated their own core infrastructures, refusing to remain as part of a decaying legacy. One Empire diplomat described it best, asterisk. They made being part of us unbearable. Asterisk. Humanity didn't demand submission. They didn't install new governments. They didn't replace what they destroyed. They erased the concept of dominance altogether. In doing so, they offered nothing, only the removal of what had once been. A vacuum of power with no intention to fill it. Then the primary AI core collapsed. Located in the galactic center, this system controlled macro navigation, galactic taxation, military logistics. It had redundancy across thousands of nodes. All failed within 3 minutes. Final logged entry, asterisk. Directive conflict, purpose undefined. Asterisk. Empire engineers found no hardware fault. No external hack. The AI's conclusion was purely internal. It no longer believed in the Empire's right to exist. The system rejected orders not because they were flawed, but because the very concept of command had lost meaning. That collapse marked the inflection point. Without centralized coordination, Empire fleets began to fracture. Internal disputes over hierarchy led to mutinies. Some captains declared themselves independent. Others withdrew into isolation, unwilling to risk further entanglement. The Navy, once a force of order, disintegrated into scattered remnants. Dozens of flagships went dark, silent not from destruction, but from abandonment. Within months, economic implosion followed. Empire credits became unstable. Trade routes were ignored. Luxury worlds, dependent on constant import, starved while production hubs overflowed with unused supply. With no guiding structure, planets defaulted to chaos or autonomy. Rebellion wasn't necessary. The system simply decayed. One final attempt was made to reassert dominance. A summit was called, the last unification of high-ranking officials, surviving command lords, and remaining governors. They gathered in a secure station orbiting a neutral star, escorted by every loyal fleet still operational. The objective was to reset control, declare a galactic lockdown, and begin a cultural purge of human influence. The summit ended before it began. As dignitaries prepared their statements, every screen flickered simultaneously. Human-coded transmissions bypassed all encryption. One message played, translated into every Empire language, across every channel, on every display. Asterisk. You taught us how to fall. We taught you what waits at the bottom. Asterisk. No threat. No conditions. Just a reckoning. 1 minute later, the station's artificial gravity reversed. Emergency systems failed. Entire chambers crushed inward. No weapon signature detected. It was later theorized that the anomaly had been seeded into the infrastructure long before the meeting was planned. An event scripted not around opportunity, but inevitability. No one survived. With the death of its final leaders, the Empire became a relic. Not defeated in open battle, but in function, in memory, in belief. Planetary systems reverted to isolation. Some tried rebuilding. Others descended into feudalism. A few formed new coalitions, vowing never to repeat the mistakes of galactic dominion. No Empire flag remained flying in any known sector. Humanity did not return to claim victory. There was no proclamation. No celebration. They left the ruins untouched. Their war had no endpoint, because it had no need for one. The objective had been clear since the first orbital strike: make the galaxy understand the price of assuming superiority. And now, in the aftermath, that understanding endured. Deep within forgotten code, in the remnants of fallen satellites, one recurring signature persisted, repeating across broken networks, unreachable systems, and silent worlds. A single phrase embedded in every protocol, every forgotten line of code, every abandoned outpost. Asterisk. We remember what you did. And we became the answer. Asterisk.